According to the Warrens, a student nurse was given the doll in 1970. They say the doll behaved strangely, and that a psychic medium told the student that the doll was inhabited by the spirit of a deceased girl named Annabelle. The student and her roommate tried to accept and nurture the spirit-possessed doll, but the doll reportedly exhibited malicious and frightening behavior. It was at this point that the Warrens say they were first contacted, moving the doll to their museum after pronouncing it demonically possessed. The doll remains in a glass box at the Warrens Occult Museum in Monroe, Connecticut 23456. Texas State University Assistant Professor of Religious Studies Joseph Laycock says most skeptics have dismissed the Warrens Museum as full of off-the-shelf Halloween junk, dolls, and toys, books you could buy at any bookstore. Laycock calls the Annabelle legend an interesting case study in the relationship between pop culture and paranormal folklore, and speculates that the demonic doll trope popularized by films such as Child's Play, Dolly Dearest, and The Conjuring likely emerged from early legends surrounding Robert the Doll, as well as a Twilight Zone Season 5 Episode 6 titled Living Doll, in which the character of the mother is coincidentally named Annabelle, released 5 years prior to the Warren story. Laycock suggests that the idea of demonically possessed dolls allows modern demonologists to find supernatural evil in the most banal and domestic of places. 1. Commenting on publicity for the Warrens Occult Museum coinciding with the film release of The Conjuring, science writer Sharon A. Hill said that many of the myths and legends surrounding the Warrens have seemingly been of their own doing, and that many people may have difficulty separating the Warrens from their Hollywood portrayal. Hill criticized sensational press coverage of the Warrens Occult Museum and its Annabelle doll. She said, like real-life Ed Warren, real-life Annabelle is actually far less impressive. Of the supernatural claims made about Annabelle by Ed Warren, Hill said, "We have nothing but Ed's word for this, and also for the history and origins of the objects in the museum." 7. The doll was also described in Gerald Riddle's 1980 biography of Edward and Lorraine Warren, the demonologist. The real story behind Annabelle. Before she inspired a hit horror franchise, Annabelle was just another Raggedy Ann doll possessed by a dead girl. Annabelle. Warner Brothers. Tweet. Share. Post. Bookmark. Subscribe. Whether or not you believe in the Warrens' real-life paranormal cases is one thing. However, there's no denying that Ed and Lorraine's tales of the supernatural have captured the pop culture imagination. The Conjuring universe has turned the pair's exploits into a billion-dollar franchise, and with 7 movies already in the bag and more on the way, the series doesn't appear to be slowing down anytime soon. Even if the Warrens' claims of encountering spooks and demons are hoaxes, Hollywood can't get enough of them. The latest installment of the Conjuring franchise, Annabelle Comes Home, hits theaters on June 26, 2019. In the film, the titular doll returns to wreak havoc on the Warren family, played by Patrick Wilson, Vera Farmiga, and McKenna Grace, and she's bringing some of her demon pals along for the ride. Check out the trailer below. While Annabelle Comes Home looks like an entertaining chiller, the film series wouldn't exist at all without the real Annabelle doll and her nightmare-inducing past. She has quite the history. According to the actual tale, Donna, a student nurse, received the Raggedy Ann doll as a gift from her mother in 1970. When the doll exhibited strange behavior in front of Donna and her roommate Angie, a medium revealed that it was possessed by the spirit of a 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins. Apparently, the little girl had been found dead in the field that Donna's apartment complex was built on, and her restless spirit just wanted somewhere to live. At first, Donna and Angie gave the spirit permission to reside within Annabelle. She was an innocent child after all, right? Not quite. Annabelle subsequently attacked their friend Lou, and the roommates contacted the Warrens, who discovered that the doll was actually being manipulated by a demon who desired Donna's soul. Top articles. 2/5. Read more. The Peninsula trailer dispels the myth that zombie movies are all the same. After learning the horrifying truth about the demon's intentions, the Warrens summoned a priest to perform an exorcism. That wasn't the end of the whole spooky affair, though. Afterward, when Ed and Lorraine were driving home with Annabelle in their possession, the car kept breaking down, and its brakes stopped functioning. Upon arriving home, the demonic doll started displaying supernatural signs once again. After another unsuccessful exorcism attempt, Annabelle was taken to the Warrens Occult Museum and placed in a glass case. These days, she's a tourist attraction. The film franchise is only a loose adaptation of the true Annabelle story. For a start, the movie doll is porcelain as opposed to a Raggedy Ann. Furthermore, her origin story doesn't include Donna, Angie, or Lou in the first Annabelle film. A husband gives the doll to his pregnant wife as a gift. Shortly after, their home gets invaded by a satanic cult, who pass the malevolent demon into the inanimate object. The Warrens' recollection of the events doesn't include any mention of said husband, wife, or cult. Of course, some people claim that the Warrens' Annabelle story is every bit as fabricated as the horror films that were influenced by it. In fact, some skeptics believe that the real story is similar to a 1963 episode of The Twilight Zone called Living Doll, which features a character named Annabelle, Mary LaRoche, who buys a haunted doll for her daughter. Now, I don't want to call the Warrens liars. Maybe they genuinely believed that their doll was haunted by a demon, but the doubter in me cannot overlook the glaring link to Twilight Zone. At least the director Toy Story 4, Josh Cooley, admitted that his idea for a villainous doll was borrowed from the iconic show. Another pop culture entity that's been associated with Annabelle is Don Mancini's Child's Play series. According to the Warrens, their case inspired Chucky's unholy conception. Mancini, meanwhile, has said that Chucky was created as a response to the riotous Cabbage Patch Kids phenomenon. I don't know who to believe. That said, if any doll legend can be compared to Chucky, it's Robert, who boasts some striking similarities to him. Regardless of whether or not any of these doll lores helped spawn Child's Play, I'd be willing to bet the success of Annabelle's cinematic outings was a motivating factor behind the upcoming reboot. Overall, everything ever said by the Warrens will always be a source of dispute between believers and naysayers. But Annabelle still helped popularize the scary doll trope that's been commonplace in horror cinema and television for decades. For that reason alone, fans of scary movies should be thankful for the Warrens' contributions to the field of paranormal research. A doll maker named Samuel Mullins and his wife Esther grieve for the loss of their 7-year-old daughter Annabelle, nicknamed B, who dies when she accidentally steps in front of a car. 12 years later, the Mullins opened their home to provide shelter for Sister Charlotte and 6 girls left homeless by the closing of their orphanage. Despite having been told not to enter B's locked bedroom, Janice, a young orphan disabled by polio, discovers a note saying "Find me" and sneaks into the room, which has mysteriously become unlocked. She finds a key for B's closet and opens it, where she sees an eerie porcelain doll. This unwittingly releases a powerful demon that begins to terrorize the girls. One night, the demon, taking B's form, appears to Janice, saying that it wants her soul. Although she attempts to get away using a stair lift, the demon recalls the stair lift and hurls her violently down to the ground floor, leaving her severely injured and confined to a wheelchair. Janice's best friend Linda is tormented by the demon. One morning, the demon, posing as Sister Charlotte, wheels Janice into the old barn, where, in the form of B, it attacks and possesses her. Linda notices changes in Janice's behavior and tells Samuel that Janice snuck into B's room and found the doll. Janice, who can now walk, transforms into the demon and brutally kills Samuel. Linda takes Janice's doll and throws it into the well. A strange noise comes from the well and she is almost dragged into it, but Sister Charlotte saves her. Alarmed, Sister Charlotte speaks with the disfigured Esther, who is confined to her bedroom. Esther explains that after B's death, they prayed to whatever entity would grant their wish to see their daughter again. An unknown entity answered their prayer, and though they briefly saw B's spirit, the entity convinced them to transfer its essence into one of Samuel's crafted dolls. They happily agreed but soon realized they had attracted a demon looking for a human host. One night, Esther saw B's spirit transforming into the demon, which then gouged out her eye. Enlisting the help of priests to bless the house, they locked the doll in B's closet. Esther and Samuel opened their house as a shelter to repent for their actions, but Esther now regrets it since this has provided an opportunity for the demon to look for a human host. The demon murders Esther and attacks Sister Charlotte. The orphans leave the house, but Linda is trapped and hides in B's room as the possessed Janice tries to stab her. Sister Charlotte locks Janice and the doll inside the closet. The next day, police arrive to search the house and find only the doll, which they remove as evidence. Sister Charlotte, Linda, and the orphans are escorted away by officers, while Janice escapes through a hole in the closet wall and relocates to an orphanage in Santa Monica. Still possessed, she becomes reclusive and calls herself Annabelle. The Higgins family soon adopt Annabelle. 12 years later, a grown-up Annabelle joins a satanic cult and, along with her boyfriend, murders her adoptive parents, which catches the attention of their next-door neighbors, the Forms. In Santa Monica, California, John Form, a doctor, presents his expectant wife Mia with a rare vintage porcelain doll as a gift for their first child to be placed in a collection of dolls in their daughter's nursery. That night, the couple is disturbed by the sounds of their next-door neighbors, the Higgins, being murdered during a home invasion. While Mia calls the police, she and John are attacked by the Higgins killers. The police arrive and shoot one killer, a man, dead, while the female killer commits suicide by slitting her throat inside the nursery while holding the porcelain doll. News reports identify the assailants as the Higgins' estranged daughter, Annabelle, and her unidentified boyfriend, both members of a cult. In the days following the attack, a series of paranormal activities occurs around the Form's residence. Afterwards, Mia gives birth to a healthy baby girl. She and John name their child Leah. The family rents an apartment in Pasadena and, after finding the doll that John had discarded since Annabelle's previous attack in one of their boxes, another set of paranormal events plagues Mia and her daughter. The next night Mia is haunted by a malevolent presence in her apartment. She believes it to be Annabelle's ghost after she encounters an enigmatic figure in the building's basement, who begins pursuing her before she escapes clarification needed. Mia calls back Detective Clarkin to gather information about Annabelle and the cultists and learns that the cult intends to summon supernatural beings. With the help of bookseller and fellow tenant Evelyn, Mia realizes that the cult practiced devil worship, which summoned a demon who followed the family after they moved to their apartment so as to claim a soul. Upon returning home, Mia and Leah are attacked by the demon who reveals itself while manipulating the doll. Mia and John contact their parish priest, Father Porres, who informs them that demons sometimes attach themselves to inanimate objects as an advantage to accomplish their goals and that a human soul must be offered for a purpose. Without any hopes of exorcising the demon out of the doll, Father Porres decides to take it away to seek help from the Warrens for investigation. But before he can enter the church, the demon impersonating Annabelle's spirit attacks him and grabs the doll. The priest is hospitalized on the next day and, when John checks on him, Father Porres warns the latter that after sensing its powerful presence, the demon's true intention is to claim Mia's soul. That night, while Evelyn is visiting Mia, the demon uses Father Perez's physical form to sneak into the apartment and abduct Leah for her mother's soul. To spare her daughter, Mia attempts to jump out of the window with the doll, but John arrives in time along with Evelyn to stop her. Evelyn decides to take her life in Mia's place instead as atonement for causing a car accident that resulted in the death of her daughter Ruby years ago. As the Forms are reunited, the demon and the doll disappear, while Leah is safely inside her crib. 6 months later, the doll is bought from an antique shop by a mother as a gift for her daughter Debbie, one of the nursing students from the prelude of the first film. Did the owner of the doll ever contact a medium and have a seance? Yes. Although there is no medium or seance depicted in the movie, according to the Annabelle doll true story, as told by Ed and Lorraine Warren, the doll's owner, Donna, contacted a medium after noticing that 3 drops of blood had mysteriously appeared on the doll's chest and more blood was on the back of the doll's hand. The medium became involved 4 to 6 weeks after the paranormal activity first began. Annabelle Toy Doll. Buy the Mesco 18-inch Annabelle toy doll and grab the attention of your guests. The medium held a seance and introduced Donna and her roommate Angie to the spirit of Annabelle, a 7-year-old girl who had played in the fields that existed where Donna and Angie's apartment complex now stood. Apparently, Annabelle's lifeless body had been discovered in the fields. Out of compassion, Donna and Angie permitted the spirit that they thought was that of Annabelle to stay with them and possess the doll. It should be noted here that the above version of the story, which is presented in the Demonologist book and is currently featured on the website of paranormal researchers Ed and Lorraine Warren, differs from the version of the story told by Ed Warren in a 1980s video tour of his occult museum. In the video, Ed states that the medium told Donna that Annabelle had died in an automobile accident outside Donna and Angie's apartment. Ed states that Annabelle was 6, not 7. During the video, he also says that the Raggedy Ann doll was given to Donna by her mother as a Christmas present, not a birthday present as the Demonologist book states. Are these contradictions enough to raise doubt with regard to the authenticity of the Warren story? Has the real Annabelle doll inflicted physical harm on anyone? Yes, but not to the degree shown in the movie. A man named Lou was the fiancé of Donna's roommate Angie and had been staying with them since the doll had arrived. Lou wasn't fond of the doll and warned Donna that it was evil. One night, Lou awoke suddenly from a deep sleep and realized that he was unable to move. He saw the Annabelle doll at his feet and watched as it slowly glided up his leg and over his chest. Before he knew it, the doll had begun to strangle him until he blacked out. He woke up the next morning certain that his experience wasn't a dream. On a later occasion, Lou and Angie were studying maps to prepare for a trip Lou was embarking on the next day when they heard rustling noises coming from Donna's room. Lou approached the closed door and waited for the noises to stop before entering. He turned on the light and saw Annabelle laying on the floor in a corner. He walked over to the doll, but as he did, he began to sense that someone was behind him. He spun around but no one was there. In an instant, he found himself doubled over, grabbing his chest, which was now bleeding. Upon inspection, he discovered 7 claw-like scratches on his chest, 4 horizontal and 3 vertical, that were hot like burns. The scratches healed rapidly and were fully gone in 2 days. Have there been any deaths associated with the real Annabelle doll? Paranormal researcher Ed Warren believes that the doll has been responsible for at least 1 death. During a video tour of Ed and Lorraine Warren's occult museum in Monroe, Connecticut, Ed pointed out the Raggedy Ann doll in its case. Many of the objects in this room here have had dire effects on people. People have been maimed, have been killed. People have wound up in mental institutions because of many of the things that are right in this building here. You have the voodoo dolls, you have the Raggedy Ann doll, which was responsible for the death of a young man who came in here one time, who challenged the doll to do its worst and it did. The young man had apparently come to the occult museum on his motorcycle with his girlfriend for a tour. As Ed Warren was giving the tour, the young man started to mock the doll and while doing so, he ran up and began tapping on the glass of the case that the doll is enclosed in. He challenged the doll to put scratches on him like it had supposedly done in the past to a man named Lou, who had been friends with the doll's former owner, Donna. Ed kicked the young man out of the museum. Approximately 3 hours later, the young man died when he lost control of his motorcycle and hit a tree. His girlfriend survived but remained hospitalized for over a year. Warren's occult museum tour. Was the spirit of a dead 7-year-old girl named Annabelle really linked to the doll? According to the Warrens, Donna, who owned the doll, along with her roommate Angie, contacted a medium who held a seance with the doll present. The woman had told them, the medium, that there was a spirit of a 7-year-old child in the doll by the name of Annabelle, says Ed Warren, who had been killed outside of their apartment house in an automobile accident. Well, there was such a child, but God does not allow a child's spirit to go into a doll. This was a devil, a demon, inside the doll, which was impersonating the spirit of a child, seekers of the supernatural. Unlike the movie, the doll's owner never saw what appeared to be the ghost of a different 7-year-old girl named Annabelle Higgins, who in the film grows up to start a satanic cult. In the 2017 prequel, we learn that Annabelle Higgins is actually the fictional orphan Janice, who became possessed by the demon attached to the doll. Janice escaped, was adopted by the Higgins family, and changed her name to Annabelle after the doll, which in turn was named Annabelle after the doll maker's daughter, who died at age 7 when she was hit by a car. How did paranormal researchers Ed and Lorraine Warren end up in possession of the Annabelle doll? According to the Annabelle true story, after the demon that was attached to the doll inflicted physical harm upon Donna's roommate's fiancé Lou, it was then that Donna, the doll's owner, came to the realization that the spirit might not be all that innocent. Donna contacted an Episcopal priest named Father Hagen, who contacted a superior, Father Cook, who immediately got in touch with paranormal researchers Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens convinced Father Cook to perform an exorcism on the apartment in order to cleanse the home. He also blessed the individuals who were there. At Donna's request, the Warrens took the Raggedy Ann doll with them when they departed. It has been in their possession ever since. Are there any other cases of haunted dolls? Yes. If you've ever visited Key West, Florida, then you're probably aware of one of the more well-known haunted dolls, Robert the Doll, which was the inspiration for Chucky from the horror movie Child's Play, pictured below. As the story goes, the doll had been given to Key West painter and author Robert Eugene Otto in 1906 by a Bahamian servant who worked for the Otto family. The servant was skilled in voodoo and black magic and was reported to have been displeased with the family. Young Eugene became inseparable from his doll, which he named Robert, after himself. His parents could often overhear Eugene talking to the doll. They assumed Eugene was changing his voice to make the doll talk back, but eventually they suspected that the doll was actually speaking. Over the years, passers-by reported seeing the doll move from window to window. The family caught glimpses of Robert the doll running from room to room, and others claim it emitted a terrifying giggle. When Eugene's parents heard loud noises from his bedroom during the night, they would enter only to hear Eugene say, "Robert did it." Child's Play Chucky and Robert the Doll. The possessed good guy's doll Chucky, left, from the horror movie Child's Play was inspired by Robert the Doll, right? However, Robert was far less diabolical than Chucky and never killed anybody. I had the privilege of seeing Robert the Doll, above, right, in person during a 2011 trip to Key West. He is housed in a glass case in the Fort East Martello Museum. Hundreds of pen-written letters adorn the wall next to Robert, and before taking a picture, you are instructed to ask Robert for permission. Learn more about the doll via this short Robert the Doll documentary. The Annabelle doll escaped from the Warrens Occult Museum in Connecticut. On August 14, 2020, a rumor started to circulate on social media that the so-called Annabelle doll, the supposedly supernatural toy that inspired horror films such as The Conjuring, had escaped from an occult museum in Connecticut. The terms Annabelle and Warren Museum both started to trend on Twitter as social media users posted messages about the demonic doll that purportedly was on the loose. These fears, however, were for naught, as the Annabelle doll did not actually escape from the Warren Museum. It is, after all, an inanimate object. For those unfamiliar, the Warrens Occult Museum was a real place and housed some of the artifacts collected by paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren. The duo are perhaps most famous for investigating a haunted house in New York in 1975. That investigation inspired the book The Amityville Horror and several films of the same name. The pair also investigated reports about a Raggedy Ann doll that was supposedly possessed by a young girl named Annabelle Higgins. This doll, which was later put on display at the museum, also inspired a number of horror movies. Here's an image from the New England Society for Psychic Research Facebook page that supposedly shows the real Annabelle doll. But the Warrens Occult Museum is no longer in operation. Both Ed and Lorraine Warren have passed away, and according to Atlas Obscura, the museum was closed in 2018. The Monroe Sun reported that the Warrens' son-in-law, Tony Spera, was looking for a new home for the museum. It was reportedly closed due to zoning issues, but the paranormal property has yet to reopen. The status of the museum is a bit of a moot point, however, as this rumor did not start with any sort of police reports, ghoulish videos, spiritual sightings, or a frantic call from Spera to be on the lookout for a demonic doll. This rumor appears to have originated with a mistranslation. The rumor started circulating shortly after The Hollywood Reporter published an interview with Annabelle Wallis, the actress who played Mia in the Annabelle movie. Wallis talked about her new film, The Silencing, as well as what it was like to work with Tom Cruise in The Mummy. Wallis also talked about running in her interview, and The Hollywood Reporter included a video of some of the escape scenes from The Mummy. As this news circulated on Chinese-language social media sites, the news about Wallis running appears to have been misconstrued as Annabelle, the doll, escaping. Did the real Annabelle doll escape? Everything she could be doing. The idea of your toys getting up and moving around was charming as a kid. After all, Toy Story made it look like an adventure. The reality of it, if you believe in the supernatural, is a lot more terrifying. For those interested in such stories, there are dozens of tales of dolls that have been possessed by spirits and the terrifying actions that happen from it. The most famous of these, of course, is Annabelle. While she is purposefully terrifying in the film series based on the stories surrounding her, the real Annabelle doll is a Raggedy Ann doll. Now there was a rumor going around that this ultra-possessed doll had escaped from her home in the Warrens Occult Museum. Ed and Lorraine Warren took possession of the dollar, but that's not the case. So who is Annabelle? Why should we be terrified of the real-life haunted doll? Why did we think that she had escaped the museum to wreak havoc across the east coast of the US? Here are the answers to those questions. A brief history of the real Annabelle doll. In 1970, a student nurse was given Annabelle by her mother as a present. Shortly after receiving the doll, odd occurrences began to happen around the apartment where she lived with her roommate. Strange notes appeared, the doll moving on its own, odd dreams and malicious attacks. It all happened. A psychic medium told the woman that a child named Annabelle possessed the doll. Now paranormal investigators Ed and Lorraine Warren didn't believe that. The theory that the Warrens put forth is that Annabelle is possessed by a demon. Demons, after all, take the form of something weaker and harmless in order to get people to trust them. So the Warrens took Annabelle with them and placed her in their occult museum. This is, of course, a very brief history of Annabelle. The whole story is pretty wild, all things considered. In fact, people believe that others have died after making fun of or challenging Annabelle on some level. So this one doll that you don't want to piss off, you know. The idea was reinforced due to Annabelle's involvement in the Conjuring franchise as a recurring antagonist. The real Annabelle doll escaped? Why on earth did the internet think that Annabelle had escaped? Apparently, someone thought it would be funny to change Annabelle's Wikipedia page to reflect this fact. Now, deep breaths and put down the salt. Annabelle is accounted for. She has not escaped and is on the loose. While the Warren Occult Museum was shut down due to zoning regulations, Annabelle and the rest of the collection is in possession of the Warren's son-in-law Tony Spera. So Annabelle is coming to murder you in your sleep. Just take a deep breath, okay? So she's really not going to come? The real Annabelle doll is under lock and key, perhaps living in the glass container that the Warrens kept her in for decades. Haunted dolls, there are stories of those by the dozens. Annabelle is just merely the most well-known and documented. The other is, perhaps, Robert the doll, who lives in Florida and who you can never take a picture of without asking first. Literally everything in the Toy Story franchise gets like 1000% creepy when you think of the existence of Annabelle and Robert. Just be glad that both of them are very safe and very much under surveillance. Either way, It's a major yikes and no thanks from the scaredy cats here that may have had a panic attack or a possible Annabelle escape. No one wants to get murdered in their bed by a demon doll after all. The real Annabelle doll didn't escape. Where is she locked up? Paranormal enthusiasts and believers had quite a scare earlier today when the Wikipedia page for Annabelle, the very famous and real possessed doll, said that she was missing. The immediate, pants-wetting terror that swept through the paranormal community was compounded by the rush of people making jokes on the internet. What? Because, of course, 2020 would be the year the real Annabelle doll was unleashed onto the world to kill us all. Maybe we should just lay back and wish for the sweet embrace of a demon-possessed Raggedy Ann doll dragging out immortal souls to hell. It wouldn't be the worst thing that's happened in 2020. Honestly. That's the thing that should probably scare you the most. What is the world we live in? Long story short is that, no, Annabelle is not on the loose. She will not try to kill you in your sleep. You can stop salting the doorways and pounding down churches for the holy water. Annabelle is with Tony Spera, son-in-law of Ed and Lorraine Warren. The Warrens, as many paranormal fans know, are the famed demonologists and paranormal investigators. They had Annabelle for decades, safely locked away in their museum. Ed and Lorraine Warren had an occult museum that was open for decades. Zoning regulations, however, saw that the museum was shut down. Though, hopefully, it will reopen elsewhere because it was full of interesting things, the real Annabelle doll, pieces of a crashed airplane said to be haunted, a real bee. Museum. Ed and Lorraine Warren had an occult museum that was open for decades. Zoning regulations, however, saw that the museum was shut down. Though, hopefully, it will reopen elsewhere because it was full of interesting things, the real Annabelle doll, pieces of a crashed airplane said to be haunted, a real vampire coffin, Ouija boards that summon demons, etc. With the death of Lorraine Warren in 2019, Ed passed in 2006, the future of the museum seems fairly uncertain. Of course, the Warrens' daughter and son-in-law are taking over their legacy. So who knows? The Warren Occult Museum will more than likely be reopened in a new place for all to enjoy. So where is the real Annabelle doll? Presumably still in her case with the other objects nearby. The Warren Occult Museum was run out of their home, so that's why it was shut down due to zoning regulations. It wasn't up to code and presumably, the neighborhood was tired of tourists taking all their parking. If a new home for the museum is found, then Annabelle will be moved there in her glass case where no one can touch her. Presumably, and hopefully, the moving crews will be very extremely careful in moving her. The internet has had one huge heart attack with believing Annabelle escaped. No need to think about what would happen if a mover accidentally breaks the glass. And the real Annabelle doll looks quite different. Annabelle is in fact a Raggedy Ann doll. Presumably, the reason they went with the scary-looking porcelain doll in the horror films based on the story is because the people who own Raggedy Ann don't want to be associated with demon-possessed dolls. They don't have anything to hide because it's just good business sense. So where is the real Annabelle doll? Presumably still in her case with the other objects nearby. The Warren Occult Museum was run out of their home, so that's why it was shut down due to zoning regulations. It wasn't up to code and presumably, the neighborhood was tired of tourists taking all their parking. If a new home for the museum is found, then Annabelle will be moved there in her glass case where no one can touch her. Presumably, and hopefully, the moving crews will be very extremely careful in moving her. The internet has had one huge heart attack with believing Annabelle escaped. No need to think about what would happen if a mover accidentally breaks the glass. And the real Annabelle doll looks quite different. Annabelle is in fact a Raggedy Ann doll. Presumably, the reason they went with the scary-looking porcelain doll in the horror films based on the story is because the people who own Raggedy Ann don't want to be associated with demon-possessed dolls. They don't have anything to hide because it's just good business sense. So if Annabelle ever does escape to have a murderous rampage through the streets, look for Raggedy Ann, not the purposefully creepy AF doll that they use in the Annabelle movies. There's a difference. And oh boy, it's a big one. Although, it really makes you think about how they sell Ouija boards as a board game.